As for how 2023 races go, this one was actually not that bad, with very hard racing, a lot of good overtakes, hard ones but good ones, and an actual record breaker by the Max Verstappen. What a beast. Let's talk about it. Is the racing unjust? Is the FIA unfair? Some certain situations that occurred in 2021 and 2019 that are kind of now being overlooked. Same things that happened. Is it always a different situation with this FIA? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the incidents and let's analyze the race. So to start the race, Ferrari was actually performing well here. If we actually had Charles jump and play the team game with Carlos, they could have won this race. I do think Charles was being a little bit lenient on his actual deployment and trying to go for the overtake on Max. Especially in the first 15 to 16 laps, while they were fighting, Charles got within 4 to 5 tenths, then lost some momentum and then fell back. It was a back and forth. I wish Charles could have actually overtaken him, and then they played the team game because we could have actually had a different winner. But I'm also happy for the record-breaking Max. I mean, he's an animal, honestly. And he almost got Monza cursed there at the end. He had to actually solve some issue towards the end. That's why Perez was within 6 seconds. Otherwise, it would have been 15 to 16 seconds. Regardless, Perez actually had a pretty decent race. We had a lot of people actually having very decent races. To me, Carlos Sainz was the deserving driver of the day, defended for over 15 to 16 laps, drove perfectly, had a little bit of a lockup. That's what got Verstappen ahead. But the actual thing that I wanted to talk about was very similar to the 2021 Monza incident with Hamilton and Verstappen. Now, Carlos defended him in a way that Hamilton defended Verstappen in 2021 and resulted with Verstappen getting on top. You guys know the deal. Well, the same thing happened here, but this time it was very clean. Verstappen actually pulled out instead of going ham like he did on Hamilton. So the racing was actually pretty just here. And in my opinion, this is just hard racing. There's no unfair thing to it. As Max says, it was naughty. It was a little bit naughty. He pushed him pretty far, but it's a pretty narrow chicane though too. There's not much racing room, especially with these big ass cars that we have. So obviously a little bit room for error is very marginal in this spot. And Max took the smart way out. He knew he had the faster car and took the smarter option. Now in Monza in 2021, he probably had the slower car out of the two there, knew that for that situation needed to get ahead because of the dirty air and the compromise in 2021. So different scenario. I think this was fair. This was one of 3 incidents that we will go over. Okay, my actual light died on me, so the lighting might be a little bit different, but I've tried recording this video 3-4 times now, so I'm just gonna record it like this. Hopefully it's not too bad. What I was talking about was going into the incidents. It was Carlos Sainz actually fighting with Perez, and so was Leclerc for the rest of this race. Verstappen got a pretty good lead. But the actual midfield fight was very awesome to watch. We had Albon, we had Norris, we had Piastri, we had even Alonso joining in at some point. It was a very highly contested midfield fight. Also Hamilton, forgot to mention. And within that meantime, Hamilton had a actually strategy that worked out for the competitors that started with hards and then went on to the mediums. Now, the only guys that actually did this were Bottas, Hamilton, and I'm pretty sure there was one more. I can't remember now at the top of my head, but that was actually the better strategy to have here in Monza. Now, with that happening, Hamilton was making a huge comeback and at some point got to Piastri. As they're going into the 4th turn, Piastri and Hamilton make contact, as the thumbnail shows. Now, what does this remind you of? It reminds you of Leclerc and Hamilton in 2019. Hamilton gets a 5-second penalty. Leclerc got 0 penalties, even though he pushed off Hamilton not once, but twice in that position. So, is this unjust? Well, in my opinion, the 5-second penalty should have happened in both situations. Hamilton was wrong here. He squeezed him all the way towards the end, didn't have the room. Piastri ends up actually getting his front wing clipped and really ruining his race. He doesn't get any points at the end of it, even though he was trying to make a comeback towards the end of it. Well, the 2019 situation should have been the same thing. Leclerc should have gotten the penalty. Hamilton should have been able to actually win that race. Now, when you look at it from the FIA's perspective, of course, they didn't want to give the penalty because it was Ferrari. The same thing just happened in qualifying yesterday. So, I mean, in that situation, I get it, but it is unfair. That is the whole entire point that I'm trying to make. The FIA makes decisions based on the dramatic effect or whether some people are going to be pissed off, not watching, whatever, so on. I can get both perspectives, but I don't see this as a way of coping with something that happens. So I think that both should have been 5-second penalties. Hamilton even went and apologized to Oscar Piastri after the race, which I think was fair to do. And then the very last part we had was Ferrari fighting each other, which was Leclerc and Sainz battling it out, which was my favorite part of the race. Now, the racing was close. They were going at it. Even Xavi going onto the radio saying, all right, no risk towards the end. You know, very intense. Ferrari in Monza. They both want a podium. They both want to win. This is what racing is about. This is beautiful to watch, in my opinion. It was standout, amazing racing. I loved that Sainz finished ahead. He was my driver of the day in most other people's opinion. I think that he had probably one of his best races of his career. Now, while it wasn't a P1 or P2 finish, let's be honest, the car was super fast in a straight line, but the only way they could have gotten a win was if they DRS trained Max till the pit stop, had Leclerc go longer, defend him, slow down like completely on Ascari and into the first corner, and then Sainz come out of the pits, gain an advantage, and pray that they can actually keep those tires towards the end. But let's be honest, that would have had to have been a very insane strategy and maybe even a safety car. Regardless, the fighting, as both Charles and Carlos loved it. Charles actually talks about it being very similar to karting and going back and forth, being very much on the edge. I mean, if you watch him going into the parabolica towards the end, he's literally turning that wheel back and forth because the car is so unstable on its rear. We even have Max during his, cool down podcast, actually had a different guest today. You had Carlos Sainz on the podcast, a special guest for today on Max Verstappen's podcast. And he says to Carlos, he's like, dude, I feel bad. Like, honestly, your car is so hard to drive. The rear end is so insane. I mean, dude, the Red Bull was just so stable the whole entire race. Aston Martin struggled. Mercedes was actually very grippy, but they didn't have as much straight line speed. So it actually turned out to be the better situation. As I said in a video before, and I continue to think this, I think these cars, as we start moving more and more into this floor direction, which is 2024 and 2025, the cars will have bigger rear wings on the back of them because the better strategy is to actually save your tires and focus on that DRS effectiveness rather than going for a low wing. Now, Ferrari almost made it work, but still, they didn't come out with the victory. Now, all in all, this whole entire race, with the racing and the hard overtakes, was this fair? Well, in my opinion, this was the best overtakes we had of the year. Hard, super close to each other, maybe a little bit of contact, but fun racing. I think Formula One should start making more tracks to have this type of way of racing, which is, I guess if you do have a longer straight, having a chicane, making it a little bit more narrow, but the car's got to be smaller though. I think that's another issue. These cars are a little too big for the liking of overtaking. So yes, there's a little bit of contact, but it was done in a very fun way. Now, I didn't like the Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton crash, but I didn't think that was necessarily bad for Formula One. I think that was meant to happen. Even Oscar says, like, it's a very narrow corner. Like, you got to take it in a certain way. Lewis Hamilton probably would have gone long if he didn't actually push Oscar all the way to the end. So it really just depends on the situation. Tracks should be made differently and more overtaking should happen like this, a little bit more physical. I think it works for our sports, especially in the way that our sport has been as of lately with overtaking with more dirty air and so on. It makes it much harder. All in all, I think Monza was a good race for 2023 and one of the best we've had when it comes to overtaking and hard racing. But the FIA's got to clamp down on whether or not they're making the right decision at the right time. Because I think that they could have had a couple of other decisions in the past that would have been a lot better. Lastly, a couple of honorable mentions. Bottas had a great race. I'm very, very happy for Perez. I think Perez had one of his best races of his year. Pace-wise, he was very good, but also he was patient. He knew he had the better car. He could have gone for the overtake on Carlos or Charles multiple times, but he decided to take the safest, most possible overtake and waited for his opportunity. We knew he wasn't getting P1, but from P5 to P2, he had a very formidable race. He was even good on George Russell because everybody was defending him extremely hard, which finally we saw people defend a Red Bull. It's always like, oh, let him pass. People are now becoming more and more aware that the Red Bull is losing its pace on certain tracks. I mean, you go back to like Silverstone, so they're going to cook everybody. But regardless, it comes to show that the actual pecking order is a lot closer and people are actually tending to defend a lot more, which is, thank God, finally happening. In Miami, Max Verstappen was able to just pass everybody without even a sniff of defending him. So this is good signs. I hope that we continue down this path and I hope that we get more racing like this in the future. Next is Singapore, and I'm very excited to watch it. So if you haven't, please subscribe and like the video. It would mean the world, and peace.